Welcome, guys. This is a Just an Equitable Transition podcast, the mini Toko series. I'm here with my brother JK. Hope you guys enjoyed. You saw what just happened. We just came back from a great space, full of stories and full of lore. And this is day 2 of our brief séjour here in Dubrovnik.
French.
We are here coming to you from Dubrovnik here in Croatia. And so today got me thinking a bit, of all the places that we visited. It was a very hot day as well. It's a hot day. You can see from the face.
Yeah.
He told me my face looked black. Look at that.
Look at my forehead.
Thing like all suntan and then the eyes. Anyways, guys, today's talanoa about the podcast is, I think, a lot about story. You've gotten me into this cycle about thinking a lot about stories, about how stories, enable the mind to imagine and be creative. But not only with stories, it's also about lore and how we can relate with those stories. There's a lot of stories that have things that we can learn from, that we can relate to as well. And so, one is, we're here in Dubrovnik, and the stories that we currently, we hear in all the places that we visit. We went to a really amazing place. It's called, what's the name of the island? Lokrum Island. Here, it's really just off the coast of the city.
Yeah, you could swim there if you want.
You could swim there.
I'm not gonna swim there.
We took a boat. We took a boat to the island, and we walked around the island, and we came across this beautiful monastery. And just realizing how important, the stories that, connect us to more stories that we can imagine and relate with, bro. What makes a story powerful, especially a maritime story?
I think maybe in general, for me, a story is powerful if you can relate to it. Because if you experience something because that's the power of a good story, is that people can take whatever message they need out of the story. I think that's a good thing. So like if you've experienced something that's very impactful for you, then you'll know that if someone's telling that story, you can connect to it. And that for me is what makes a good story. It's personal, at the personal level. And if someone tells a very specific story only about a very specific thing that only that person knows, it's not going to be a good story if someone else hears it.
Yeah, true.
But the lesson from the story could still be.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think a good story has a lesson that can be learned and something can resonate.
Okay, we're talking about stories. What was the highlight story that you learned from today? Like I'll start off first. One was I loved the story about learning about how the story of Lokrum Island and how the history of it. It has a very rich history.
Yeah.
And a beautiful one of the events that happened was during the Crusade times. The Crusade times, and we learned about this amazing character called Richard the Lionheart. So apparently during the Third Crusade, on his way back, he had a shipwreck and ended up on the island of Lokrum, where we visited. And once he came on that island, he established his community, and he built this community on the island. How did you feel about learning about that story about Richard the Lionheart?
Man, to be honest with you, I didn't actually read any of it. I didn't read any of the thing. I didn't read much of it.
Yeah, but I mean, you knew the history, but it's different when I remember learning about Richard the Lionheart, through the documentaries, through the stories that we'd read.
Oh yeah,
but then
even in the
in the Pacific, we learned about this stuff. But coming to the place, it's different when you read about a story and you actually visit the place where these events happened.
Oh yeah, for sure.
We were at this monastery where Richard the Lionheart built this community around. How did you feel about that part?
For me, it's quite sad because to see the building is not being used.
Oh yeah, anymore. It wasn't maintained.
Because it's a ruin.
Yeah,
the building is a ruin.
Yeah,
and it's not being used for the purpose that it was set up. And I mean, it was even sadder to see that the people who built the monastery were kicked out of the island centuries, close in the 18th century.
Yeah.
they were asked to leave the island, and that's where the whole thing's falling apart. But yeah, no, I mean, seeing the history and reading about someone very popular, famous like Richard the Lionheart. Honestly, I don't even know why we know in the Pacific we know him so.
That's what I wanted to come. Well, that's what
I don't understand why he's the one we know so.
It was funny because, you know, we learned so much about European history and, you know, the stories, you know, around the people like Richard the Lionheart, World War II, World War III, you know, the royal families in Europe, and, you know, all of those stories. But what I wanted to come back to is, you know, how come we learned so much about Europe and the Western world and their stories?
Yeah.
What does that mean for our own stories back home? You know?
Yeah, exactly. And I think even when I came here, because I mean, I wasn't a normal child. I was weird.
Define normal.
I spent my time reading encyclopedias.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Right.
I love them.
Children's encyclopedias. And there I learned about all the European history before we even came here. And you end up knowing more about the European history than the Europeans themselves, which is a very strange thing.
I remember in high school, you know, topics like World War I, apartheid, the Mao dynasty, not Mao dynasty, the Mao era in China, you know, all of these events we learned so much in history, apparently, and I knew so much about these stories. But when it came to Pacific stories or like Pacific topics in school, it was usually like the last 2 weeks of the end of the year, but we'd spend like so many weeks on these other different topics.
Yeah.
And then when it came to the Pacific topics, it wasn't, you know, it was like...
With the idea you just go and ask your grandmother.
yeah. But that's what I was saying, is because sometimes we don't realize how these stories...
to be taught.
Yeah.
Seriously.
Yeah.
Not seriously. But I actually didn't study Tongan history in school. What I'm very fortunate is my grandmother used to sit me down and teach me the Tongan myths and legends. And like my mom would tell me stories of Tongan history that she knows, and my dad as well. They're both pretty knowledgeable in Tongan history. But yeah, like I mean, that's where I got my Tongan, not from school, but from the family.
That's a big part, you know.
Yeah.
But it still doesn't get to say that, you know, in our education systems, you know, like why was our Pacific topics, you know, short? You know, short. Well, it should actually be more time spent to learn more about our own histories and our communities, you know, so that we can learn more and celebrate more. And I think that's an important part about our communities. Yeah. And not just we learn it at home, but in the education system as well, you know, to learn more about these topics.
But that's one thing that I learned. My dad was telling me that when even his generation, they were taught to be outward looking, because their future is not in Tonga but in like New Zealand, Australia. So they were taught the history, the songs, the language of those countries, because the idea is that they would end up working there. That's where all the opportunities are. But we know right now people can't even go to Australia and New Zealand. You know, it's very difficult for us to even go and work there unless we have the history and the means to do that.
But I think that's the power of stories, is that, you know, we tend to be very selective of what kind of stories we want to learn, you know, or what stories should be celebrated, or what stories should be taught, or what stories should be told, you know, because sometimes even in the stories that we tell, there are certain characters or their communities within the story that are not told from their perspective. You know, their perspectives are exactly. And I think that's something that I learned a lot about when, you know, imagining, you know, learning the stories about Richard the Lionheart, going to the island, seeing firsthand, you know, the spaces and how this whole building and this monastery, you know, learning about the stories, it really made me think about how ourselves as Pacific peoples, how do we tell our stories, especially being in a different space away from home. You know, how does that feel when you come to a space? You know, like for example, how do you feel standing inside this old European monastery as a Pacific Islander? What did it make you think about?
I mean, honestly, for me, I think as a Catholic, because it's standardized, right? The religion is standardized. You have a lot of the same things around the world. So for me, it felt a bit familiar. when I walked in there, but that was because I'm a Catholic. As a Pacific Islander, I mean, it's something completely different, right? Because we don't, all our spaces, or most of our spaces that we deem to be important, our churches and our government buildings and our cultural buildings, they're all used. Like, we use them, and they but
true.
when we go here, because they moved away from their religion, like they become, the Enlightenment and all that.
Yeah.
Spaces like that, they just decay. And like I'm
And then
thinking,
become these places to go and visit, like sightseeing places,
What I'm thinking is that what's awaiting us in the future? There will be spaces like that are just the bones of the structure not being used for the purpose they were built for anymore. True. And that's something that I, as an islander, I was thinking about when I was in that monastery, because it's a ruin. Right, it's just a bunch of rocks right now standing on top of each other, and the Iron Throne is there too. So most people go there for the Iron Throne, not for the fact that there's a monastery there.
There is the Iron the Game of Thrones. The actual Iron Throne was inside this monastery.
Yeah, and people didn't care about the monastery.
They didn't care about the monastery. I think you and I were the only ones that stood there for a long time reading, and everyone just like skimmed through, just watching.
Iron Throne,
everyone. There was actually lines.
And they were Europeans, but this is their heritage, right? That's their heritage, and they just don't care about that stuff. Like yesterday, when we went to the Franciscan Museum, I heard an American guy saying, "Oh, it's just a bunch of Christian stuff. I don't really care." But that's like their history, and they don't really, they don't care about this stuff anymore. And I'm scared that that's what we're gonna be facing in the Pacific, about our own culture.
That our own. I mean, there's a lot of places, places that had so much meaning that are just
not anymore.
People don't use them anymore. People or they've lost the meaning of what those spaces are, and they've used these spaces for something totally different. Or not what they were actually built for. That was the first. That was there was some good reflections about stories, but also the spaces where these stories are lived. And what's the meaning of the space? Don't get me wrong, we played a little bit of tourist by going taking pictures at the Iron Throne and all. But before the Iron Throne,
we tried to see, read about.
We wanted to, because the monastery, the Iron Throne is not about the monastery. It has no connection to the monastery. It was what? It was gifted.
Yeah, it was gifted. The prop was gifted.
But you look at the monastery, I think almost a quarter or even half, the whole place was ruins, and the other half was this huge.
All right, it was
the Game of Thrones and all of
the only intact room was used for the Iron Throne.
Exactly, but it just comes to show that you don't just go for the things that everyone wants to see. I know it's good to go and see it, but the space where we actually were there was a rich history about it, and we wanted to learn about it.
Yeah, and exactly, and I think it also shows how what people view as important change over time, right? Because there was a time when people were interested in the history, and they went there for the history. But now, the fact that the Iron Throne, the prop that they use is there, that's what people find.
That's what's pulling the tourists in, which comes to show what's the whole purpose of it now. Is that monastery going to be just for them to go and see the Game of Thrones, or are you going to take the extra mile and actually, learn more about?
I can tell you now, no one was reading any of the stuff in the signs and all that.
But I'm great that before we eventually reached the Iron Throne, we learned more about the foundations of that monastery, how that monastery was connected to the Crusades, how it was connected to Richard the Lionheart on his own journey. During the Crusades, it was, and how that monastery and that space held that history and connected to Richard's own history, and contributed to this overall European history about the Crusades. Guys, that was our reflection on the importance of stories, the spaces where they were held, and how these two Tokos go and just we learn about the space, and we learn about the stories of the space. And I think after we learned, the story, it was very hot as well. It was a bit hot today, but I think another highlight was, with all that knowledge we learned about the space, walking around that island, we actually went for a swim on the Adriatic Sea.
And the water was so good.
The water was really good.
It was just the right temperature.
It was, and
all the Palangis were staring at us because we were the only ones who were there 2 hours non-stop in the water.
I think we were there longer
The
because
Palangis swimming, they go out, wait, and come back in and go out, but there's two.
Aston just stayed inside the water the whole time.
It was a perfect temperature.
Yeah, it was. Guys, that's our little reflections today, talking about stories, our journey. Stay tuned because this mini Toko series is gonna go take us places and give you great reflections about our journey on this whirlwind that we're doing right now. So yeah, stay in touch and we'll see you at the next one. To end off, here are some pictures and some little short clips about our vids, about our journey today. We hope you enjoyed and we'll see you in the next one. Yeah, we'll see you in the next one.
Just put the good pictures of me in the dump. In the photo dump, not the bad ones.
Alright guys, we see you tomorrow for the next one. Peace, brother. Malo of Atu. Ololum. Wait, something.
That's the line on your phone.
Your line gonna go.
My forehead is really black.
What?
My hats can't fit on my head.
In that case, let's go through. Thanks, guys. See you next time.